This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, everyone. For people who are just joining us, we're going to take a couple of minutes because it takes a while for people to come in electronically. It's not quite as slow as physically getting people through a doorway, but it's not as immediate as you would think it would be. So again, welcome to the people who are filtering in. Just to say, we're going to be starting in a few minutes. I will do an introduction. I'm giving people a minute to get in. There's always an odd silence. We should have some elevator music playing or something, shouldn't we, to keep people entertained? This is the point for Jeremy to show his video while we're all waiting to start. Okay, it's been a couple of minutes, so let's make a start. Welcome, everybody. My name's Mary-Ann Stephenson. I am the director of the UK Women's Budget Group. We're really delighted to be able to host this webinar. As many of you who are familiar with our work will know, the Women's Budget Group has long been concerned about the relationship between unpaid care work and paid employment, and in particular has often focused and highlighted the fact that women, the unpaid work that's largely done by women is at the heart of women's economic inequality. So we were really pleased when we heard about this research project to be able to be involved in this webinar to share the findings with you. We've got a brilliant panel here today, chaired excellently by Lexi Topping from The Guardian. So I am going to hand straight over to her and let her run the show. I just wanted to be here at the beginning and say thank you all very much for coming. And we're all really, really looking forward to this event. So Lexi, over to you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this incredibly important topic and one that is very, very close to my heart. And thank you to Mary-Ann, who and the entire Women's Budget Group, in fact, who do such incredible work in this area. You know, always keeping to the facts, always keeping the pressure on, and just, you know, nailing it with every single briefing that they give me. So I'm always grateful for their work. Everyone who's come to a panel like this today cares about making a difference and changing the status quo. And that's really important because the status quo simply doesn't work. And we all know that. Everyone who has a family or even knows a family knows that the status quo doesn't work. We all know, you know, dozens and dozens of women who've had to give up careers that they love because the childcare arrangements just don't make economic sense. We all know dozens of men who are desperate to spend time with their children, but because the economic setup of our society doesn't allow them to, they can't do that. So hopefully today, as well as talking about the findings of this really important report, we're going to bounce some ideas and, you know, try and be as solutions focused as we can, because if there's anything that we've all got in common, it's all that we want to try and change things. So I'm going to hand over soon to our panel. If you have a question, please just do put it in the Q&A box, and I will get through to them once we've had our presentations and I've opened up the panel for a bit of wider discussion. I suppose I should say who I am as well. Sorry, I should have said that at first. I'm Lexi Topping. I'm a senior reporter at The Guardian. I write a lot about gender and inequality, but I am, as most of the people who are on this panel know, because I'm always bugging them and phoning them up for quotes, utterly obsessed with the idea of shared parenting. And I really genuinely believe that, you know, shared parenting is at the heart of transformation of society. We can't do any of the other things to equalize relationships, to improve equality, if we don't tackle this one big thing at the heart of it. And sadly, we're nowhere near doing that at the moment. So hopefully we're going to get some good ideas today. So first off, we're going to hear two presentations of the report. We're going to hear from Dr. Anna Jordan. She's the Associate Professor in the School of Science and Social and Political Sciences at the University of Lincoln. Anna is the co-author of the paper and she'll be presenting it. And we're going to hear from Jeremy Davies, who's a journalist mainly specialising in health and social policy. He's recently completed a PhD about gay fathers. He's a father to one son and an absolute oracle on this subject. So thank you both so much for being here. I think we're going to hear from you first, Anna. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Just hopefully getting my slides sorted. Excellent. So thank you very much for joining us today. We're very excited to be here, and we're finally sharing our research findings and launching the research report for the Caregiving Dads, Breadwinning Mums project. The project was funded by the Nuffield Foundation, and as Lexi said, I'm Anna Jordan and I'm one of the research team on the project at the University of Lincoln. So I'll be giving a short overview of our key research findings and recommendations. There's lots more detail in the report, so if you do want to read that, the link is already in the chat, I think, but you can download it and read it later on. The rest of the research team are all here, and some of them will be joining us to answer questions in the discussion later as well. So hello again and welcome, and thanks for coming. So just to start with a bit of background for why we did the research, although I think possibly Lexi has already put that into some context. It's known that although men's and women's involvement in paid work and childcare has become increasingly similar, the work and care arrangements of most British couples continue to reflect traditional gendered norms, with mothers as primary caregivers and fathers as primary breadwinners. And the gender division of family work is closely linked with gender inequality in the workplace. So existing evidence suggests that women continue to carry the main responsibility for childcare and compromise their work lives by prioritising their family at the expense of career advancement. On the other hand,
I know we can't see your slides. Do you think you might be able to share the slides? Sorry to interrupt you. Thank you.
apologies.
Don't apologise, thank you.
Okay, so welcome again, and I'll start again. Haven't got very far, luckily, so it's okay. So yes, so existing evidence suggests women continue to carry main responsibility for childcare and compromise their careers as a result. On the other hand, men carry the main responsibility for breadwinning and tend to compromise their family lives by putting their paid work first at the expense of the opportunity to develop close, intimate connections with their children as main caregivers. So this gendered inequality in the home both disadvantages women in the workplace and denies men the opportunity to develop close, nurturing relationships with their children. So the persistent gender division of responsibilities restricts and disadvantages both men and women, preventing them from choosing a balance that's best for them and their families, regardless of their gender. So to identify routes and barriers to greater gender equality, we examine parenting arrangements where childcare responsibilities are shared equally or they're assumed primarily by the father alongside more traditional parenting arrangements. And this is the first study to use a mixed methods approach to examine couples' work and care arrangements from the perspectives of both mothers and fathers, and to uniquely compare equal sharers, role reversed and traditional couples in a single comprehensive design. So we conducted a survey which produced data from a nationally representative sample of parents with children aged 11 or younger. And the survey took place in February 2020, so just before the COVID-19 pandemic. We also interviewed 30 couples or 60 parents, speaking to 10 couples in each of our 3 study groups. And the interviews were conducted during the pandemic. The survey and interview were designed to answer 3 key questions. So 1, what do the parenting practices of equal sharers and role reversed couples actually entail? So what do they look like in terms of time and task distribution between the couples? 2, what are the economic, structural and psychological factors that enable role reversed couples and equal sharers to resist gendered parenting norms? And 3, what are the consequences of the division of roles for well-being and relationship satisfaction? So there's only time to show you a small slice of our findings, but overall, our findings show that both mothers and fathers in all parenting arrangements want to be closely involved in their children's lives. But most couples feel forced to identify a main carer with reduced involvement in paid work and a main breadwinner with reduced involvement in childcare. So opportunities for organising family life in ways that allow both parents to be equally involved in work and care are constrained by gendered parenting leave entitlements, long work hours cultures, limited options for flexible and part-time work, and expensive, inaccessible childcare. So the couples who manage to overcome these obstacles are characterised by a strong commitment to gender equality, mothers' strong work identities and earnings, and fathers' desire to be heavily involved in raising their children. So some of our key findings about our first study group, traditional parents with traditional parenting arrangements. In the majority of families, the mothers are the main carers and arrange their paid work to accommodate childcare, including long maternity leave, part-time work or flexible hours. The fathers have the main responsibility for breadwinning and work full-time, long and often inflexible hours, sharing childcare in the evening and weekends only. So as you can see on the slide, I hope now, 25% of fathers in traditional arrangements felt forced into their role and saw no other viable options, and only 30% felt they were able to choose, so they felt that they had chosen this division of roles. And that's compared to 46% of fathers who were primary caregivers who felt that they did choose their division of roles. Mothers in traditional arrangements also reported significantly lower well-being and relationship quality than mothers who shared childcare equally or reversed roles. So key points about couples who reversed roles. They were typically motivated by mothers' greater attachment to work and higher earnings, combined with a desire to avoid or limit the use of formal childcare provision, and the father's desire to spend more time with their children. So these couples' day-to-day division of work and childcare mirrored those of traditional couples. So the fathers were the main carers, arranging their paid work to accommodate childcare, and the mothers worked full-time. So compared to traditional couples, role reversers tend to have a slightly more equal division of childcare, and that's due to greater involvement by the breadwinning mothers compared to the breadwinning fathers in traditional couples. So some key points about our equal sharing couples. So here the decision to share work and childcare equally was motivated by egalitarian gender ideologies, by an expectation of a 50-50 split to family responsibilities, by fathers' desire to spend more time with the children, and also by the importance attributed to mothers' paid work in these couples. So equal sharers were distinctive in describing conscious efforts to achieve equality and having to fight for their chosen arrangement by overcoming barriers which facilitate a female carer, male breadwinner division. So both mothers and fathers who were equal sharers worked shorter hours than main breadwinners and spent more time with their children as sole caregivers. Equal sharing mothers were most satisfied with their division of responsibilities, with 83% reporting that they were satisfied or very satisfied, compared to 60% of mothers in traditional arrangements and 52% of mothers who reversed roles. And equal sharers tended more than other parents to see their arrangement as resulting from conscious choice and were the least likely to want it to change. So based on our research findings, we make 4 recommendations. So first, there needs to be equal parental leave entitlement, including non-transferable use it or lose it parental leave for fathers. So the findings suggest that gendered policies around leave for parenting don't align with couples' commitment to equality, with fathers' desire to be closely involved in their children's lives, and with mothers' strong attachment to work. Fathers who otherwise shared care equally, childcare equally, or were the main caregivers, were entitled to 2 weeks of paternity leave only, while their partners were paid to stay at home for the first 39 weeks of the child's life. Shared parental leave was rarely used in our study, either because couples were not entitled to it, could not afford the reduction in the father's income, or the mothers didn't want to lose their time with their child by reducing their maternity leave. So gendered leave policies restrict couples' choices and steer them into a traditional division of family roles, despite their beliefs, preferences, and parenting arrangements. Our second recommendation is that government policies should support more effectively shorter and more flexible work hours for both fathers and mothers. So flexibility in working hours and working from home, part-time working, and output-based rather than time-based work were all things that were identified by parents as beneficial to managing their childcare. Despite this, both men and women reported barriers to securing these kinds of arrangements, especially for more desirable or senior roles, with some suggesting this was particularly a problem for men. Also, parents whose partners' work commitments were less flexible than their own really felt forced to arrange their work around their partner's job to facilitate childcare. So this meant indirectly prioritising the career of the less flexible partner, most often the father. In this way, flexible and part-time working only for mothers can exacerbate inequalities in arrangements, as well as potentially impacting negatively on their career prospects. So parents would like to see the normalisation of part-time and flexible working for both fathers and mothers, and regardless of seniority of job role. So third, employers can help by providing clearer, more visible workplace policies and underpinning family-friendly cultures. So our research suggests that parents' experiences of workplaces are often dependent on quite individualised factors. So whether they happen to have a supportive or unsupportive manager, for example, and employees are quite often made responsible for being aware of policies and asserting their own entitlement. So employers can help to provide more consistently positive experiences for workers who are carers by improving clarity, knowledge and visibility around existing state and workplace-specific policies, and by encouraging family-friendly workplace cultures. Our fourth and final recommendation is high-quality, affordable childcare provision is necessary to enable both parents to return to work after parenting leave from the age of 6 months. So alongside the lack of shorter hours and flexible work arrangements, the pressure that we've described on parents to identify a main caregiver and a main breadwinner is exacerbated by the lack of childcare alternatives. It's just particularly difficult in earlier years, and affordable formal childcare often means that one parent must stay at home until the child turns 3 and qualifies for limited free provision. We also found that parents find it particularly difficult to juggle work commitments with childcare after school or nursery and during school holidays. So to allow both parents to maintain involvement in paid work, affordable, formal and high quality childcare provision should be made available from the age of 6 months. So as I said, that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of our key findings and our recommendations, and there is lots more detail in the report, but some key takeaways are that our findings point to a discrepancy between current state and workplace policies and parents' actual views and preferences, that gender norms and parents' priorities are slowly changing, whereas outdated gendered policies continue to reinforce traditional norms and encourage mothers to stay at home or work part-time and fathers to work full-time. So these policies are incompatible with fathers' desire to spend more time with their children and work shorter and more flexible hours. They're also incompatible with mothers' strong work identities and desire to share family work with their partners. So our research focused on couples who managed to overcome the barriers posed by gendered policies and achieve greater equality in their family. Through their actions, they contribute to a gradual pressure that can potentially lead to the policy changes that we suggested. So I'll just end by showing you a quote from one of the fathers that we interviewed. I'll give you a moment to read that. Basically, I think this kind of sums it up. So there's a kind of inertia, and meaningful options need to be created rather than assumed to already exist for parents who want to do things differently. So thank you very much for listening. We're very happy to answer questions. We also have a short survey which has already been posted in the chat. If you could find a few minutes to fill that in, we'd be really grateful, but I'll stop there and hand over to Jeremy, I believe is next.
Thanks so much, Anna. Jeremy, I think I can't hear you at this moment, but I think if we just launch into you and then we'll start a more freeform jazz after that.
Okay, that's fine. Let me just share my screen. I hope you can see that. Thanks very much for your lovely introduction, Lexi. So it's about time. So this is, sorry, I'm struggling here with my screen. Okay, so yeah, so I'm Jeremy Davies. I'm from the Fatherhood Institute, which is a small charity which works to build a society that values and supports men as hands-on fathers and caregivers. And we do that by working in 3 interrelated spaces, which are research, policy, and practice. So it quickly became clear to us during the early days of the pandemic that the return of fathers into the domestic sphere might be impacting on their contributions and identities as workers and hands-on parents. During the spring 2020 lockdown, fathers of young children almost doubled the amount of time that they spent on childcare. 3 out of 4 were at home full-time, working or not working, and taking part in all aspects of family life: homeschooling, everyday childcare, routine housework, and so on. We did a study also funded by the Nuffield Foundation called Lockdown Fathers, the Untold Story, which was which used a sample of just over 2,000 fathers. It was a representative sample of fathers of children aged under 12, as an attempt to try and capture what was going on. I was going to show you a video at this point, but we decided that that was technologically a little bit beyond us. So I'll just briefly tell you that what we found was that partnered fathers in all socioeconomic groups provided a broad mixture of active childcare during that first lockdown. 78% of these dads reported spending more time with their children overall, 68% more time on schooling and helping with homework, and 59% more time on cleaning, laundry, and cooking. I won't go on to share more of the findings, but you can find this research on our website. And I suppose we've been interested in, obviously, as most of us have, you know, how much of this change, this huge change that happened during lockdown, how much of that has stuck. So what I'm going to be talking about today is some work that we've been doing based on new figures published by the Office for National Statistics in July, which compare time use data from 2020, 2021 and 2022 with data from the Oxford Centre for Time Use Research for 2014-15. So for the first time, we're able to look at, you know, how were things pre-pandemic, and although it feels like we're kind of not quite out of the woods yet, how were they in March 2022? So I'm going to share with you some of the findings that we have found. So this is our analysis of the ONS data. So the first one is that in 2022, so the data was collected in March, working fathers were spending almost 2/3, 65% of the time that working mothers spent on unpaid childcare. And that's up from 54% pre-pandemic. The average number of minutes fathers spent on unpaid childcare rose by 18% across that period, and mothers reduced by 3%. We also found that working fathers are spending 2/3 of the time working mothers spend on unpaid domestic work. And again, that has increased from 56% pre-pandemic. And in terms of average number of minutes, fathers have increased by 14%, the number of minutes they spend on unpaid domestic work, and mothers have reduced by 3%. Working mothers are now spending 3/4 of the time that working fathers spend on paid work, and that's gone up from 67% pre-pandemic, and that represents an increase of 20% in mothers, the time mothers spent on paid work, and fathers increased by 7% across that period. And working mothers are now spending 92% of the time that working fathers spend on travel, and that's up from 67% pre-pandemic. So what we think has been happening is that largely as a result of substantial increases in working from home, working mothers and fathers have kind of gained time, if you like, post-pandemic to spend on other things. So either paid or unpaid work And it looks like they've spent it differently. So working mothers have increased their engagement in paid work, while working fathers have increased their engagement in unpaid childcare and domestic work. And you can see the figures on the slide there. The amount of time that working fathers spend on working from home as a proportion of the overall time they spend on paid work has shot up from 6% in 2014 to 37% in 2022. Mothers has increased too, but not to the same extent. So they've gone from 8% of their time to 27% of their time. So what you can see here is that some very important measures of gender equality have shifted pretty significantly since the pandemic compared to how things were beforehand. So what can employers do to maintain or extend these gains? Well, none of these will be a big surprise to anybody here, I'm sure. Develop a workplace culture that openly supports caregiving by fathers. Support fathers and mothers who can work from home to do so, some or all of the time. Offer working fathers and mothers as much flexibility in working time as possible. Offer shift workers as much advance notice of work schedules as possible. And enable shift workers to swap shifts to meet caregiving responsibilities. I'm sure other people in the room will have other ideas, but these seem some really obvious ones to us. And that is it.
Well, listen, thank you both. That is fascinating stuff. You know, building on work that we already know. Some of it is, you know, that is completely new. I'm blown away by some of those stats, Germany. I think that's, you know, we've talked before about the massive moment of opportunity that the pandemic has been. And, you know, I remember writing a story about how it could be the biggest shift in parenting patterns since the Second World War, and I still think that that's the case. I guess it's just now how we, like you said, how you capitalize on that moment and don't let it fall away. I want to bring in our other panelists now, if that's okay. We're going to, for our Q&A, we're going to have two more academics who worked on the paper and other guests, Anna Whitehouse, which is great. So we're going to welcome into the fold Professor Ruth Gaunt. She's a professor of social psychology at the University of Lincoln. Professor Anna Tarrant, who's the professor of sociology at the University of Lincoln. And Anna Whitehouse, aka Mother Pukka, who is a journalist and editor. She hosts her own Sunday night show on Heart Radio and has done a lot of work on flexible working through Flex Appeal. So she's been quoted in Parliament. She's been quoted by me about 3,000 times. Great to have you all in our panel today. So I'm going to just go, we've got a really engaged audience here, which is superb and exactly what we want to see. So first I'll shout out to whoever the anonymous attendee who's just put simply, yes, please to solutions, which I love. That is what we're here for. And I will keep saying that to you throughout the panel. What's the solutions? What can we do? What can we do, big and small, to make the difference that we all want to see? But to the researchers of the research, Can you speak to any differences you encountered with parents that use shared parental leave versus paternity leave? So, you know, how big a difference does shared parental leave make? And I think there's a lot to be said about shared parental leave, isn't there? Let's start with, you know, the kind of impact that shared parental leave can have before we talk about its inevitable limitations and you know, complete sidelining by this government, frankly, you know, forced to introduce a policy that none of the Conservative Party actually wanted to introduce and now have roundly ignored it for several years. I think Richard Dunstan's on this call, and I will give a shout out to him as well, because he's done an awful lot of work on pointing out just how much the shared parental leave policy has been neglected. But I'm just gonna, there's a few of us on this call, it might get a little bit unwieldy, but I would ask you just to step in. I will ask the questions and I will ask them, you know, to different people. But if you feel like you're quite well placed to answer, then do just, you know, physically raise your hand, and I will bring you in. So on this question of shared parental leave, was there any work done within the study to look at the impact of shared parental leave?
So
do you want to start, Ruth?
Yeah, maybe I should start by saying there is a methodological issue here. Because the uptake of shared parental leave is so low, there simply aren't enough people in order to statistically compare between those who took shared parental leave compared to those who only took paternity leave. So statistical comparison is hard to carry out. However, we did hear from our interviewees in the in-depth interviews about their experiences with shared parental leave, and mostly about the reasons not to consider this option. So there are many reasons because of which this is not a popular option, and they have to do with the way shared parental leave is structured, its complexity. Many people are they don't know enough about it, or the policies are not clear, even for employers and organizations. And obviously it has some inherent problems, such as women have to reduce their time with their babies in order to use shared parental leave. Men's income is capped at such a point that many couples simply couldn't afford shared parental leave, and there are other issues with it. So I will leave some for my colleagues to explain.
If it's okay for me to come in there, yeah, I think it does. I think it reflects the lack of take-up, problems just in general with the policy, which from my understanding has been developed just to not be that accessible for parents, actually, and that's based on sort of research and you know, kind of critiques more generally around shared parental leave. I think it's also worth pointing out that it sits on top of existing inequalities in work care arrangements between parents. So it reflects issues with the fact that there's a gender pay gap, you know, in lots of different organizations and industries. So for some parents, it's just simply unaffordable. And if we look internationally at other policies, other family policies, just taking sort of Sweden's use it or lose it approach, we see much greater involvement of dads in those contexts, because you know, they will lose it. So actually that nudging by policy is incredibly important, and we don't have that in the current context in the UK, and I think that's an issue with some of the lack of uptake. And I don't think it reflects the individual commitments of the parents to gender equality, but rather that structural policy environment.
Anyone else want to come in on shared parental leave? I feel like it's slightly we stuck on the negatives a little bit more than the positives, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I just want to, you know, look at on some of the work that I've done on shared parental leave, one study found that if the parents who took parental leave, so as part of shared parental leave, were more likely to feed, dress, bathe and play with their children long after the period of leave had ended. In Britain, dads who took time off at birth are more than a third more likely to read books with their toddlers than those who hadn't. When I went to Finland a few years ago, because they were doing a big push on trying to increase the amount of shared parental leave that was taken in that country, I was repeatedly told, and I think this is really important, this was a really important shift for me personally, that it's not actually, shared parental leave shouldn't be about the rights of the woman to give up her maternity leave or the rights of the man, but actually it's about the rights of the child. You know, it is better for children that they are both looked after by their mother and their father, or, you know, mother and mother, whatever their makeup is. Anna, I've inspired you to say something there. Tough in.
Yeah, well, I'm Dutch, so I grew up in Amsterdam, and I think it's really interesting when we say about the sort of optics. We have in Holland a mamadag and a papadag. So that's naturally when you return to work. Obviously, it's not about shared parental leave, but there is wording for both sexes when you come back to work. And I was on a press trip in Sweden, and I was with a New York Times journalist, and she was looking around and she said, "What's with all these male nannies everywhere?" And I was like, "They're dads parenting." And I think you're very correct in saying, you know, it is about the child here. You know, the children need to have that balanced approach to go forward. And I think they're leap years ahead of where we are, just in terms of the terminology that's used. But yes, they're not male nannies, they're fathers parenting.
Yes, it would be interesting if we get to the stage where we can stop congratulating men for doing the, you know, general parenting that women never really get any congratulations for. Then I think we will have moved to a much better place. Just to keep us on shared parental leave for a moment, I will bring in this comment from Richard Dunstan from Maternity Action, who've done incredible work around this and the very low take up of SPL. He writes, "Your finding was that SPL is rarely utilised, and that reflects national data showing that only 2% of the mothers who start on statutory maternity leave use the SPL scheme to transfer some of that leave to the father. Have you got any figures of how many parents in your study did use SPL for each of the reasons that you cite?" So, sorry, did not use SPL. So did you do any kind of quantitative data analysis on why they, you know, if they didn't take up SPL, why not? Anna, do you want to do that?
Which one, me?
Yeah, sorry. Oh my gosh,
Okay.
I didn't realise that until this exact moment. Sorry.
We were joking about it earlier. We should all be called on it on this call, but yeah. So I mean, I'll kind of have a go, and Ruth might be able to jump in as well. But I think the thing is, so the reasons come from the qualitative data, and so when we're talking about the reasons, those were things that came across the data. But of course, we only had about 30 couples, so I'm not sure. We haven't got figures to hand. I'm sure we could look into that, but it wouldn't necessarily be particularly helpful in terms of finding patterns. I would also say that they weren't necessarily mutually exclusive, those reasons, so they were quite often cited in combination with each other as well. So sorry we haven't got figures, but I think they wouldn't be, again, it's a methodological question, they wouldn't necessarily be that helpful. It was more kind of, yeah, just to kind of understand and explain why parents didn't use SPL. I don't know if you want to add to that, Ruth.
No, it's just as you said, we don't have, because the small numbers I mentioned earlier, we cannot really statistically look at the reasons, but the reasons came from the in-depth interviews But I think Jeremy wants to add something.
Sorry, Jeremy.
Hi. Yeah, I suppose I'm not sure I've got much very substantive to add, other than to say that I've seen various bits of qualitative research focused on couples who've taken shared parental leave, and I think what you were saying earlier, Lexi, about it having an impact at family level in terms of doing more of the hands-on childcare and that sort of thing, certainly rings true in everything I've seen. And I've seen lots of couples talk about it having been really transformative in terms of what they do and in terms of their own relationship and how they are able to share the parenting between themselves. And I think that fits with our lockdown fathers study too, in the sense that it feels to me like when we create opportunities for fathers to spend time at home, they spend that time doing what we would want them to do, which is look after their babies, do more housework, and so on. And for some fathers, that can be a really, well, and for mothers too, that can be a really transformative experience. And I've heard fathers talk about how they've reached a whole new level of understanding of what of the mother's journey and life and what's going on at home. That is very hard to imagine, actually, if you're not doing it, because when you're out of the home at work, you're focused on doing that, and then you come home and you kind of do that thing. Oh well, what have you been doing all day? So yeah, I think I am fully of the opinion that shared parental leave is a mess and needs replacing. And I also think we need to acknowledge that it has been done in almost a kind of it feels like a sort of posh pilot to me. The people who've had access to this are people who are in well-paid jobs, working for employers who demonstrably care about them as talent. What about everybody else? Leaving aside the kind of structural problems with the design of it, it's hopeless in that sense. In the to use the term leveling up, it's just way off the mark. Do you know what I mean? In kind of in terms of allowing those sorts of freedoms to parents generally, rather than to this tiny kind of group of blue chip couples.
Yeah, and even those fail to use it mostly.
And even most of them can't afford to take it. Yeah.
Anna Tarrant, sorry, you want to come in?
Yes, please. Thank you. So I just wanted to follow up on a theme that Jeremy was talking about really there. So I lead another study called Following Young Fathers Further, which is about young dads, and many of them are in situations of disadvantage. So they don't even get any access to paternity leave, let alone shared parental leave. But interestingly, the pandemic was a real breaching experiment, I think, for those young men, because they were locked down, they were in the home, and all of the things that Jeremy was saying around, and you, Lexi, around bonding, around spending time with the partner, helping with sleeping, all of those things were apparent in their experiences of the pandemic. So we often talk about the pandemic as a potential catalyst, I think, for progression and change. And it feels like that is the thing that might affect culture change much more at the moment than policy. So actually, I think, again, we've got this broader issue around maternity and paternity leave entitlement more generally. And particularly as we move into cost of living crisis as well, I suspect that's also going to get worse. So there's something about systems change, I think, and policy change. And I'll keep mentioning that, because for me, that really is fundamental, I think, to really underpin the cultural shift that we are seeing in research, particularly in qualitative research, but that isn't being matched at that broader policy level.
Do you want to come in as well, Ruth?
Yes, I would just like to add one point about shared parental leave. The fact that there is such a small minority using it does not necessarily mean that fathers do not stay, or there aren't fathers who stay home with the child. In our group of role-reversed couples or primary caregiving fathers, 44% of the fathers stayed home for more than 6 weeks. Some of them stayed for months or a year even. The point is that many of them were not eligible for shared parental leave, so they used other ways. Very often we see that fathers combine paternity leave with some family leave or carer leave, annual leave, and unpaid leave in order to stay home. So shared parental leave isn't used very often, but not because fathers do not want to stay home with the babies, but because the way it is devised. That's just my...
Thank you. I just want to add on that. If we are looking to remain solutions focused, shared parental leave, I fully agree with Jeremy and others who on this call, is a failed policy. We know that it hasn't worked. In 2015, we were looking at, anything over 25% take up will be a success. Maybe, it's not so great at the moment. It's nowhere near 10%, which is what we'd want. It's 2% or less, and it has been since the beginning. So it obviously isn't working, but at the same time, the government is ignoring it. They did a public consultation back in 2019 and have been promising since that point that they will publish the results of that consultation, and it's still nowhere to be seen. So all of the people on this call are active in this area, have their own means. If you get in touch with the Department of Business, where is the consultation? Are they being put under any pressure? Do you know journalists who care about these things? I mean, don't all flood my inbox. I'm here, I already do care about this. But there are other journalists around who care about the fact that, this hasn't happened. So putting bees under some tiny amount of pressure to at least reveal how badly this policy, this flagship policy, has gone wrong is one small thing that we can do. I mean, because it can be transformative, it could be, particularly at this stage now, where we're in this, a whole new dimension with caregiving. If it was transformed, if it was even tweaked slightly, we might get somewhere. If anybody else has any other ideas about things that they can do, on the panel, also raise your hands. And one other thing that I think employees of businesses can do is bring up with their HR departments, what are we doing to encourage take-up of shared parental leave in our establishment? What are we doing, in Jeremy's words, to develop a workplace culture that encourages support giving fathers, particularly targets it at that fathers. I mean, we don't have much power, but perhaps with our employees, we can use the tiny amount of power that we do have. I'm going to go back into the questions. This is moving on to childcare, which again is something, if you don't stop me, I will probably just bang on relentlessly and everyone will get very bored. Did the research team or the participants have any ideas about how quality childcare provision could be increased on the massive scale that would be needed to allow all parents to work as much as they want to? I mean, this is a huge issue, isn't it? We know that without high quality, affordable childcare, parents can't go back to work. And normally we know that also means women are often left in a situation where their childcare bill is greater than their take-home pay, and therefore, like sensible people they are, think, well, what's the point in working for free? It's a huge problem. Anna, why don't you start us off? You've thought a lot about this, and you know what if, and I think what I'm going to ask you each for is if the, you know, what is the big picture idea that we need to try and push for? Anna Whitehouse, do you want to start us out off? Oh, you're on mute, Anna.
So my focus has been more obviously on the other side of the coin. We put all of our work into Flexonomics, our flexible working campaign. So that's really about cold hard cash, how businesses can actually earn more. It's not been about actually focusing on what the government needs to do, it's about actually taking it away. So my specialism is really that, so I prefer to talk a bit more about that in all honesty.
Sure.
But yeah, from my personal experience, I logged off from my career because of childcare costs. I was paying 1,800 a month. It was almost, I said on Instagram, it was a second mortgage. People said, no, it's a third, fourth mortgage at times. And I think it is galling. I experienced the capped childcare of the Netherlands. So I've experienced what it can be to have that freedom. And I think there is no way around it. We have the second highest childcare costs in Europe. It's actually debilitating, not just for mothers, but for fathers too. And we've gone beyond lobbying government now. We are going to the Law Commission to try and push things further there. But ultimately, like you said, it's our united voices that will change this. And right now, if we're talking about the burden of childcare financially and physically, is on female shoulders. But I'm going to go into a bit more depth in a bit on our Flexonomics report, because to be honest, that's where all of the weight of our research has gone. And I'll hand over to somebody else who is pushing forward a bit more on childcare.
Fantastic. We'll come back to you on that. Anna Tarrant, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to talk a bit more about the different forms of activism for this kind of, for making the case really for accessible, flexible, affordable childcare. Certainly recently ONS figures came out saying that for the first time in decades, more women are now leaving work because of childcare costs or lack of childcare than ever before. Which in its and of itself is a strong case for a failure of policy, I think, and a failure of state investment. And, you know, again, in the current sort of policy climate, then it's very difficult to make the case for why we should support childcare. For me, it's about that economic case. So I think Jolie Brearley from Pregnant and Screwed, she's got some really useful kind of campaign messages about this, about that if you have more women in the workplace, ultimately that benefits GDPR more generally. You have more women contributing to the economy, and if you exclude half of your population, they then become people who rely on state. So it's about those strong messages about the value and the importance of this economically, I think, that are more likely to appeal to the current political agenda. And I think, again, as Anna was saying, just to pick up on her theme, that collective voice, the use of research and evidence alongside activism and campaigning right at the top, that top-down approach is what we really need.
Does anyone else? Jeremy, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a very small point, and it's about messaging. So I think Anna's absolutely spot on that we need business cases, and we need the politicians to be confronted with the reality of what this is, how this is limiting our economy. And as part of that, I think we've really got to be careful to move away from this being framed as a women's problem. So the moment we want to start talking about, for example, women choosing to stay at home because the costs of childcare are as much as their salary, we need to stop and we need to reframe that point, because it's not, yes, I understand where that comes from, but this is a proportion of the household family. It's not of the household budget. It's not a proportion of her salary. that matters. So I think we've really got to start shouting that message from the rooftops and getting men on board and male representatives to tell this story so that it can't get brushed under the carpet as women's issues always do, and it gets put into that sort of women and equality box where you have a female MP who has no real power, who's kind of in charge of this thing that is actually an issue for all of us. It's not just about women.
I really strongly agree with that, and I think that this is such a huge issue that affects such a large proportion of the population, but at the moment there's only a small number of half of that proportion shouting about it, and they're easily ignored. Yeah, and we are much stronger if that is a combined voice. That's something I would like to see campaigners working more together across those areas and really trying to capitalize on what that could mean. Has anyone got any ideas in terms of smaller policy asks that might be actually feasible? I mean, I would love to ask for capped childcare fees that were available for all children from the moment they were born. That doesn't seem likely to happen, both with this current government, but also in the current kind of economic climate. Is there anything that the panelists think we could ask for that might be more reasonable, in inverted commas? I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for fully funded affordable childcare, by the way, but something that is perhaps more practical to ask for. Anna Jordan, do you have any thoughts around that?
I mean, one thing is that employers can do, as we've kind of said in our presentation, is just actually clarify where there are existing kind of state policies. They can actually put those into practice in a more consistent and fairer way. They can help parents to have a proactive approach to understanding paternity leave, shared parental leave, and they can make all of that much more visible. A lot of our participants really felt, again, that they were having to do the work themselves. Their employer didn't understand it, HR didn't understand it, they didn't understand it. So that seems quite a small thing to me that actually just individual employers could be doing. And I guess a stronger emphasis on, I mean, there's lots of calls at the moment for stronger policies around flexible working. And at the moment, it's very easy for organisations to deny requests for flexible working arrangements. So that seems to be another thing that might be fairly easy for the government to implement.
Is there anyone else who, Ruth, do you have thoughts on what other policy asks there could be?
Just because you said let's be more practical, and we cannot expect fully funded childcare from age 1 day, maybe just gradually reducing the age of the child who is eligible for some state funding for childcare. So this is something that has been happening, but on a very small scale in terms of the ages, but maybe we can go from there and hopefully improve.
That's something that I've always thought was ridiculous in our current system, is that there is, what does the government have against 1-year-olds? Why does it hate babies? Like, we give support up until the moment that, for a year, and then, the first support for any kind of family kicks in at 2, but it's already too late by then because people have left the workforce. So, why does the government hate babies? That is the new slogan. Let's rally around it. There's no reason for the government to have anything against 1-year-olds. They are quite cute. Mark Gatto has asked around this question, and I think both Ruth and Anna, you have gone down here a little bit. How do we make a more compelling case to organisations to take more of a lead in enabling parents in paid work to pursue shared parenting? Yeah, that's I really think that has to be, you know, the energies have to go in all directions, of course, but it feels like companies are taking the lead more so than government, and that's, you know, that's because of the people who are in them, isn't it? Anna Tarrant, do you want to make any suggestions?
I think it's I think Jeremy's point about seeing men as parents, I think that's absolutely fundamental to this. You know, we talked earlier about child-centered approaches, but actually children are in relationships with their parents, and you know, there's a whole range of literature, you know, 3 decades old, that demonstrates the benefits to both men and women as well, when they have that equal life balance, when men are able to engage in their children's lives right from the outset. They're able to understand the partner's experiences and you know, and the challenges of what is essentially unpaid labor. So being a parent is unpaid labor ultimately. So I think it's again that kind of collective case and a cultural shift that we need around recognizing men as parents, and that again, that takes time to embed, and there's evidence from this, as I say, for a long period of time. But you know, managers are also parents too. You know, CEOs are also parents too. So again, I think, you know, the business case around why fulfilled parents is important for productivity is also a case to be made, I think.
Great. I'm going to move us on slightly. It's something that Jeremy already touched on, and I think, but it's worth coming back to. I think we've got a question here from Rhiannon Maddox to the panel more generally. Are all parenting leave policies a little outdated, given the high percentage of new parents in precarious work right now, who are often unable to access any of these rights? I mean, we've discussed how shared parental leave is not available for the vast majority of parents. There is, you know, parents in some paid work who are employees can get unpaid parental leave every year, which is something that most parents don't know about. So, you know, part of being part of the change is also just chatting to other parents and letting them know that you can also take unpaid parental leave every year. How do we make sure that there is not some this gulf between parents who have the access to these rights and the parents who don't, and how can we, you know, bring everybody into the fold? Anna, do you want to? Anna Whitehouse, sorry. Do you want to?
Yeah, so it sort of links to actually what we were speaking about earlier, that I think if we're looking to push forward, let's say with shared parental leave, if we're looking to close that gulf between those who can have those parental leave policies and those that can't, a lot of it comes down to that cultural shift, which actually comes down to working flexibly. So if you have got if you've got the dads in your organization already working flexibly, at the moment we know 1 in 10 requests goes through for men, 1 in 4 goes through for women. So the burden of childcare, etc., is on female shoulders. But when you come to that gulf, if we're talking about positive examples here, we're working really closely with the NHS. So you would think there you've got a staffing crisis, you've got burnt out nurses post-pandemic. Is it predominantly on a lot of the wards, it's female nurses working there, and there is a gulf between the doctors who have certain policies that they can use and those in different roles within the NHS. There's a big shift. So what they have implemented, which I think is a really useful case study for anyone thinking in sort of more public sector industries, is ward-led rostering at Birmingham Women's Hospital. So in this, that gives flexibility within the roster within the nurses working underneath the matron to, let's say, if they don't have those policies, those parental policies that are given to others within the organisation, they can work flexibly with their colleagues to cover each other. So it costs nothing to the NHS. The matron has her time freed up because those working beneath her are organising their time amongst themselves. So if somebody has had to come back to work and isn't protected by a parental leave policy, not just in the NHS, but elsewhere, she can speak, or he can speak, to his or her colleagues, and they can negotiate and discuss and have each other's back. So it increases productivity. There are fewer deaths on wards that are led in this way, which is quite, if we're talking about people, humans, which is the heart of this discussion, I think it really comes down to a matter of being life or death in this situation. So I think there are case studies out there, and that's just one I wanted to bring into the fold. It's not a silver bullet, but I think if we're looking at practical examples, you can find, if you look up on Timewise's website, they have brilliant case studies in sort of more public sector realms that aren't as protected, shift workers, 0-hour contracts, and they have case studies there where the colleagues themselves have worked together to protect each other in those vulnerable moments, whether it is parenting or moving forward to menopause, these hormonally shifting moments. So Timewise has all the case studies on their website for anybody listening right now, looking to find practical examples of how to move forward more equally.
Brilliant. And I think it's also worth noting that, we talk about shared parenting as though it is this preserve of the middle classes or even the upper classes, but actually people on shift work do share parenting all the time. It's quite normal for people, that's how loads of families work this out. We just don't hear about them very much. It's because they're already doing it and just quietly getting on with it. Jeremy, you wanted to say something along those.
Yeah, I suppose that just picking up on what you were just saying, I suppose I feel like there is a research gap here, which is about finding out more about fathers' lived experiences of juggling work and home responsibilities and the impact of that on employers. We have felt for a long time that there is quite a lot of hidden churn in staff where fathers, without kind of coming out about it at work, because the culture is just not going to be receptive to them explaining that this is why they're leaving. Fathers do actually vote with their feet. And I've seen lots of kind of small scale surveys where fathers are talking about, yes, when I'm looking for jobs, I am looking at what the paternity package, let's say, is, and that is guiding my choice. And the lack of that is also guiding my actions. So I think all of that needs to sort of feed into the kind of business cases that we make for a lot of the changes we'd like to see, because I think that sort of, we hear a lot about the problems that all of this stuff cause for women, and that gets talked about in terms of women's careers being ruined, falling off a cliff, the gender pay gap, blah 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 blah, all of that. What is less clear in all our minds, and that includes in employers' minds, is the impact of all this on dads. And one could say that dads hold some level of responsibility for this because we're not shouting about it. But at the same time, the workplace, I think we can all understand that the workplace cultures are so unreceptive to all of that, that we need probably a bit of help to see this in ourselves sometimes, certainly to communicate it beyond our own families and friends, and for that to be considered and taken seriously as part of the picture of the negative impacts of gender inequalities. It's not just about women's careers being ruined, it's also about men's parenting being ruined.
I really agree with that. And I think that if we can, you know, what would be great to see, and I think we are seeing it slightly, with men in senior roles being more open about taking time off to spend them with children, taking shared parental leaves, but also just acknowledging that they have a family. And I think, you know, part of you know, one of the benefits of lockdown and the pandemic was that our families were here, right? They were right in the room. They were telling you that they needed their bum wiped as you were in the middle of a Zoom call. So none of us could pretend that we didn't have them anymore, including all the men in the room. And I think that was a massive benefit. But I think you're right, Jeremy, that, you know, I think it sometimes is difficult for men in this space. They feel like, you know, they're going to be shot down because, well, you know, what do you know about it anyway? This is just mansplaining. But I think men need to step up and fight for their rights. Also, you know, they need to actually vocally moan about this, and we need a men's movement that doesn't have negative connotations. And as from where I'm sitting, that's nowhere to be seen at the moment. But let's hope. I've got a nice question here about the interactions of unions. Where do unions sit in this space? You know, are the unions who are very proactively pushing shared parenting and equal parenting? And how do we build alliances? This is from Catherine McLaughlin. I'm sorry, Catherine, if I murdered your surname there. How do we build alliances across workers, across unions, and across lines of race and class? Of the panelists here, who wants to take that? Or else I'm going to select one of you. Ruth, why don't you chip in?
Yes, so I will talk specifically about classes, race and class, and we looked at, because there was another question in the questions box about differences between the three groups. And we did look for differences, and even though our groups were identified from a large representative sample of parents with young children, we didn't find any differences in terms of ethnicity, educational level, geographical location, and so on. The only differences, or the main one difference between the three groups, was the age of the child. So equal shares tended to have a slightly older child or youngest child. So I just wanted to say that, unlike maybe some stereotypes of equal shares or role reversers as those who can afford themselves because they are more highly educated or have better incomes, this was not the case in our sample. So this is just part of the question. The other part about unions can probably be answered better by other panel members.
I might bring Anna Whitehouse in here, who I know has worked with the TUC on flexible working at least, and at least can give us some insight into the power of unions in this space.
Yeah, so I think there's, you know, traditionally when you come down to campaigning, sometimes there can be a real fight for whose voice is most important. And actually we have the Flex for All coalition, which Jeremy knows a lot about. And things really shifted at that point when you stop seeing your own individual foghorn and unite as one very loud foghorn. And so what we found is there was more movement when we worked together in that sense. We were fighting for flex by default, flex for everyone from day one. I think it was, I can't remember who it was, maybe it was Sue Coe. She said the only job that cannot be done flexibly from a man or a woman is on an oil rig. She's like, she thinks that's probably the only place where there can't be any kind of flexibility. And so you're gathering by, you know, we talked about unity a lot, but I think that's what has been missing. And that's not just unity within activists and organizations and unions, that's unity within your own homes. And I think that's what this report really anchored for me, was a lot of, you were saying the women that we know have logged off from their careers because of childcare costs, etc. A lot of the women I know in that position aren't having the arguments in their own home. So we know within the pandemic, 47% more women than men logged off from their careers because whose job was deemed more important? At the time, it was a man's job because of gender pay gap, equal pay. But the unions, the union I want to see is at home within your own four walls, is having that discussion. Why do you think I'm paid less? You know, why do you think my career is taking a back seat? It is not because you're necessarily better than me. My husband and I, both editors, he was on £2 grand more than me a month when we're working at the same level. I was just as good, and I left, set up what I've set up to fight for this, you know, but actually what I wish I'd done was fight a bit harder behind the scenes. And so I think that's my kind of mother's quite visceral, raw call to arms, is this isn't for any one of these panelists to necessarily fix, you know, it is for the unions within your own home. And then I think, breaking it forward to the question you asked, the TUC, I reached out to them. They had research that no one was listening to. I have a platform that quite a lot of exhausted mothers and fathers are listening to. Join the dots, remove your ego. And that really, I think, has been, if we're talking about how we can work more effectively, is see the value in each different organisation and how it can come together, which anyone, if you want positive solutions right now, anyone listening, Flex for All is the coalition. There's really fighting for that flexibility that I think, you know, we know from the Equality and Human Rights Commission is the primary way to close the gender pay gap, which I think has a trickle-down effect on shared parental leave, flexible working, childcare cost. It comes from that point. So it's a roundabout way of saying, talk to your partner.
I mean, I completely agree with that, but also talk to your friends. I mean, yeah, I am that woman in the play park who, when I start up a conversation with a mum and she tells me, well, you know, she was going to go back to work, but she's done the equation and then the money is going to cost more than her wage, so she's going to be working for free. And I go, have you thought about your pension though? I'm always talking about pensions because pensions don't sound sexy, but they're so important. And
well, you've got the pensions gap, you've got the gender pay gap, you've got pleasure gap. There are so many gaps out there, and I think your point is really profound. That where are the men's voices in this? Obviously, Jeremy, you are piping up brilliantly, but actually, where are the male activists really, you know, getting out there onto the streets and supporting what Jeremy is doing? I have 1,000 women getting in touch with me every day going, how can I support you? I'm like, where are the guys? I've got 97% of my channel is followed by women, 3% men. Well, this comes down to Jeremy's point. Why are the men not interested in how their sisters, daughters, wives are, you know, being paid or dealt with in the workforce? Yeah, no, I completely agree. There's a lot of gaps out there that need filling, and it's not a women's issue to fill them.
I hard agree on that one.
Hard agree.
Else who wants to bring anything on the unions front? I mean, this is a moment of opportunity for unions as well, isn't it? So I would say and this would be preaching to the converted, I suspect, to everybody on this call who I would hope would already be in a union. But if you are in your union, make sure it's on their agenda. You know, are they fighting for this? What is their policy on shared parental leave? What is their policy on pushing for access to high quality, affordable childcare. We are seeing a slight change of the guard in the union movement. I'm hoping that that is going to shift an emphasis and bring some much needed focus on this area. But you know, like we've said ad infinitum, it will only happen if all members are doing that. So if you're a member of union and you have a male partner and they are also, make sure that they email first, because they might actually get listened to. We are about to wrap up, I think. There are loads of questions here that we didn't get around to, but I know that all of the people on this panel, although very busy, are also really energized and passionate about what they do. If you reached out to them directly, I'm sure they would be willing to continue that conversation, as am I. If, you know, there are things that are being, that you think need to be covered more in the mainstream media, I am always trying to do so. My thanks to our anonymous user who responded to my point about the government hating 1-year-olds. Why does the government hate 1-year-olds? The answer: babies can't vote and don't pay taxes. So, which is true, which is probably why we're being ignored. We've got lots of thanks in the Q&A, just to say thank you for holding a really important debate around this subject. We've run out of time, but I think there's a lot of food for thought in what we've heard today. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you for the important research that you've carried out and the campaigning work that you do. And thank you everybody who's spent their time and their lunch hour coming onto this call, because, you know, you genuinely do want to make the world a bit fairer, and it is people like you who will actually make that change happen, rather than people who are sitting around the cabinet table, I think. So thank you all for your time today, and I hope we'll speak again soon, and we'll have seen loads of improvements by then.
Thank you, Lexi. Can I just also thank the funders, Nuffield Foundation, as well, just for supporting this work. You know, we wouldn't have been able to do it without that funding. So thank you to Nuffield as well for supporting this. There is a report coming out from this, and there's also an executive summary of the key findings, and they're available on our project website. So please do follow up and get in touch if you have any questions about those. Thank you.
Brilliant. I don't know how to actually end the panel, so I'm going to let someone who is, you know, the actual technicality of it. I don't think I can do it, but anybody who's on the call who does want to stay in touch with me, I am at the usual Guardian email address, which is alexandra.topping@theguardian.com. And thank you all.